For over a millennium, the Zenith Dominion had ruled the galaxy with a cold, unyielding hand. Their empire was a vast machine, perfected through centuries of conquest and domination. Entire civilizations had been reduced to ashes beneath their relentless fleets. Worlds once teeming with life were now barren wastelands, their histories erased, their cultures forgotten. The Dominion's reach extended to the farthest edges of the known universe, their power unquestioned, their will unchallenged. Their war fleets were legendary massive armadas of sleek, obsidian ships that blotted out the stars wherever they went. Each vessel bristled with weaponry so advanced it seemed like sorcery to the species they conquered. To encounter the Zenith Dominion was to face inevitable annihilation or servitude. No one resisted for long. When the Dominion arrived at the borders of human space, it was just another routine conquest to them. Humanity was classified as a minor species, technologically inferior and insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The Zenith High Council barely spared a thought for this new target. Earth would fall as countless others had before it. The Dominion sent their standard ultimatum, a message that had echoed across the galaxy for centuries. Submit and serve, or face obliteration. It was a cold, impersonal statement, delivered without emotion. To the Dominion, it was not a threat, it was a fact. Most species, upon receiving this message, capitulated immediately. They would beg for mercy, offer their resources, and kneel before the Zenith overlords in the hope of avoiding annihilation. But humanity's response was different. The Dominion waited for the usual desperate pleas, the frantic negotiations. Instead, they received a single, cryptic transmission. The message was short, almost dismissive. Understood. The words hung in the air like a ghost, carrying no fear, no desperation, only a strange, unsettling calm. The Zenith High Council was taken aback, then amused. The audacity of this primitive species. Surely, they didn't understand the magnitude of the power they faced. The council chambers, a grand hall of gleaming black stone and shimmering light, echoed with laughter. The Zenith leaders, towering beings with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through reality itself, mocked the humans' arrogance. They think they can resist us, one of the warlords sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Let them try. It will make their fall all the more entertaining. The order was given. The fleet, 60,000 ships strong, was dispatched without hesitation. It was a display of overwhelming power, a hammer meant to crush humanity with such force that no other species would dare defy the Dominion again. The armada surged forward like a tidal wave of darkness, its ships cutting through the void of space with eerie precision. Each vessel was a masterpiece of destruction, their hulls glinting with the cold light of distant stars. The fleet moved as one, a single, unrelenting force, its path set toward Earth. As they advanced, the Dominion commanders felt no doubt, no fear. To them, this was not a battle, it was an execution. Humanity would be swept aside like so many before them, their worlds burned, their people enslaved or erased. But in the vast silence of space, something lingered. A faint unease, like the whisper of a storm on the horizon. The humans' calm response, their simple acknowledgement, gnawed at the edges of the Dominion's confidence. Still, they dismissed it. What could a species as primitive as humanity possibly do? The fleet pressed on, their engines humming with power, their weapons primed. The stars ahead seemed to dim as the Zenith Armada approached, casting a shadow over the fragile worlds of human space. The Dominion was ready to strike, their victory assured. Or so they thought. The first assault was swift and merciless. The Zenith dreadnoughts descended upon the outermost human colony like a storm unleashed from the heavens. Their ships, massive and ominous, cast shadows over the planet's surface as they rained destruction from above. Cities crumbled into ash, their once bustling streets silenced beneath waves of fire and smoke. The screams of the dying were drowned out by the deafening roar of orbital bombardments. Within hours, the colony was gone, its defenses shattered, its inhabitants either dead or enslaved. To the Zenith Dominion, it was just another victory, another world added to their long list of conquests. But as the fleet moved toward the second human colony, something shifted. What had begun as a routine campaign of annihilation turned into something far more unsettling. The humans fought back. At first, the Zenith commanders dismissed the resistance as futile. The humans' weapons were crude by Dominion standards: railguns, missiles, and nuclear warheads. Tools of a primitive species. And yet, as the battle raged on, the humans' defiance began to take its toll. The railguns struck with unexpected precision, piercing the hulls of Zenith frigates. Nuclear warheads detonated with blinding fury, their shockwaves ripping through the Dominion's formations. The humans fought not with desperation, but with calculated ferocity, as if they had been preparing for this moment all along. For days, the second colony held out. The Zenith fleet, accustomed to swift and decisive victories, found itself bogged down in a grueling conflict. Every time they advanced, the humans pushed back with renewed vigor. It was as though the very spirit of the planet refused to yield. The Zenith commanders began to feel something they had not known in centuries: frustration. And beneath that frustration, a seed of unease began to take root. When the fleet finally broke through and reduced the second colony to rubble, the victory felt hollow. The losses they had suffered were minor compared to their overall strength, but the resistance they had faced was unnatural. It was as though the humans were fighting with knowledge they shouldn't possess, strategies that defied their technological limitations. And then, the fleet reached Earth. The blue planet hung in the void like a jewel, its surface alive with swirling clouds and glittering oceans. But the Zenith fleet saw no beauty in it, only another target to be destroyed. Yet unlike the colonies before it, Earth was prepared. Its orbital defenses bristled with weaponry, its skies patrolled by swarms of fighter craft. The Zenith fleet paused, momentarily taken aback by the sight. This was not the behavior of a species on the verge of extinction. But before the Dominion could act, humanity made its move. A single ship emerged from Earth's defenses. It was small, insignificant compared to the massive dreadnoughts of the Zenith fleet. Its hull was unremarkable, its design plain. To the Zenith commanders, it looked like a relic that had no place in a theater of war. Admiral Cale Draith, the commander of the Zenith fleet, observed the vessel from the bridge of his flagship. His sharp, angular features twisted into a sneer as he studied the tiny ship on his tactical display. "They think one ship will stop us," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is their final act of defiance? Pathetic." The bridge crew laughed, their voices cold and mocking. The lone ship was an insult to the might of the Zenith Dominion. But as the vessel advanced, something changed. It didn't fire weapons. It didn't attempt to evade or retreat. It simply moved forward, its trajectory unwavering, as if it were being drawn toward the Zenith flagship by an invisible force. Admiral Draith's sneer faltered. There was something unsettling about the ship's silence, its calm defiance. He barked orders to destroy it, and the Zenith fleet unleashed a barrage of firepower. But the ship continued undeterred. The energy blasts that should have obliterated it seemed to dissipate before reaching its hull, as though the very fabric of reality bent to protect it. And then, the disappearances began. One by one, the ships of the Zenith fleet began to vanish. There were no explosions, no wreckage, just an eerie silence as entire vessels blinked out of existence. The crews aboard them were gone, their voices cut off mid-scream. Admiral Drath watched in horror as his fleet disintegrated around him. The tactical display, once filled with the glowing icons of Zenith ships, now showed only empty space. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The lone human ship continued its advance, untouched, unstoppable. It drew closer to the flagship, its presence a silent declaration of power. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The human ship vanished, leaving nothing behind but the void and the shattered pride of the Zenith Dominion. Admiral Drath stood frozen on the bridge, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. In the vast emptiness of space, the silence was deafening. And for the first time in its long history, the Zenith Dominion felt the cold grip of fear. The silence was suffocating. The lone human ship drifted amidst the vast Zenith armada, a speck of insignificance surrounded by the overwhelming might of 60,000 warships. Its hull gleamed faintly in the starlight, unremarkable and plain, a ghostly shadow against the backdrop of the void. Yet, it moved with purpose, steady and unyielding, as though it carried the weight of inevitability. Admiral Cale Drath stood on the bridge of the Zenith flagship, his sharp, predatory eyes fixed on the vessel. His confidence, once unshakable, wavered as an unnatural stillness filled the air. The human ship wasn't attacking. It wasn't evading. It simply was. And then, it began. The first Zenith ship vanished without warning. One moment it was there, a towering dreadnought bristling with weapons, its hull glinting with a cold, metallic sheen of destruction, and the next, it was gone. No explosion. No debris. Just an empty void where it once stood. The bridge crew froze, their mocking laughter replaced by stunned silence. "What just happened?" Drath demanded, his voice sharp and brittle. Before anyone could answer, another ship disappeared. Then another. And another. Panic rippled through the fleet like a wildfire. Crews scrambled to respond, issuing frantic orders to fire on the human vessel, to retreat, to do something. But it was too late. The Zenith Armada, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, was unraveling. The disappearances were methodical, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to an inevitable end. Ships blinked out of existence one by one, their crews vanishing without a trace. The silence was deafening, broken only by the desperate cries of Zenith officers as they tried to make sense of the impossible. "Where are they going?" one of Drath's subordinates whispered, his voice trembling. Drath didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind, so accustomed to the cold logic of conquest, struggled to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't war. This wasn't even annihilation. It was something far worse, something beyond the Dominion's understanding. The human ship continued its slow, steady advance, untouched and unyielding. It didn't fire a single shot. It didn't need to. It was the weapon. Within minutes, the once mighty Zenith Armada was gone. 60,000 ships, erased as though they had never existed. The darkness of space swallowed them whole, leaving behind only an eerie, unnatural stillness. And then, the lone human ship spoke. A single transmission echoed across the void, its message simple and chilling. "Understood." The words hung in the air like a specter, heavy with finality. They carried no malice, no triumph, only a quiet certainty that sent shivers through the surviving Zenith officers. And then, the ship vanished. Panic spread through the Zenith Dominion like a plague. The news of the Armada's obliteration reached the High Council within hours, and the halls of their grand citadel, once filled with the cold confidence of rulers, now echoed with fear and confusion. The Dominion's greatest minds, scientists, strategists, and scholars, were summoned to analyze the disaster. They pored over the data, searching for answers, for some clue as to what had happened. But there was nothing. No energy spikes. No weapon signatures. No anomalies in space-time. It was as though the laws of reality themselves had been rewritten. "How can this be?" one scientist muttered, his voice trembling as he stared at the data. "There's no logic to it. No cause. No effect. It's impossible." But the impossible had happened. The Zenith High Council, beings who had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years, found themselves gripped by an unfamiliar emotion, fear. For the first time in their long history, they had encountered something they could not control, could not understand. The Dominion had always believed in its invincibility, its supremacy over all things. But now, that belief was shattered. The humans, primitive, insignificant humans, had done the unthinkable. They had erased the most powerful fleet in the galaxy without lifting a finger. And the message they left behind, those two simple words, echoed in the minds of the Zenith leaders like a haunting refrain. Understood. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A declaration of war? Or something else entirely? No one knew. But one thing was certain: the Zenith Dominion, for all its power and arrogance, was no longer the hunter. It was the prey. The Grand Chamber of the Zenith High Council, a place once defined by cold order and calculated dominance, had descended into chaos. The air crackled with tension as the warlords, clad in their ceremonial armor adorned with trophies of countless conquests, roared their demands for retaliation. Their voices were sharp and venomous, echoing through the chamber like the growls of cornered beasts. "This is an insult to the Dominion. A challenge to our supremacy," one warlord bellowed, slamming his fist onto the crystalline table that stretched across the room. "We must strike back. Burn their worlds to ash." But their strategists, pale and shaken, stood in stark contrast to the warlord's fury. These were beings who had mapped the stars, dissected the tactics of 1,000 species, and orchestrated victories so precise they bordered on artistry. Yet now, they were silent, their confidence shattered. One of them finally spoke, his voice trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. "We cannot retaliate, not yet. We don't know what we're fighting. We don't know how they did this." The warlords turned on him, their rage palpable, but even their fury couldn't mask the truth. The Zenith Dominion, the most powerful empire in the galaxy, had been humbled, no, humiliated by a single ship. At the head of the table sat Emperor Valen Cories, his presence casting a shadow over the room. His golden robes shimmered faintly in the dim light, a stark contrast to the deep furrows of worry etched into his face. Cories was a ruler who had never known defeat, a man whose very name inspired fear across the stars. But now, he felt something he hadn't felt in centuries: uncertainty. He raised a hand, and the room fell silent. His voice, calm but heavy with restrained fury, cut through the tension like a blade. "We cannot act blindly," he said. "We are not savages, to lash out without understanding. I will not risk another fleet until we know the truth." His words carried weight, but they did little to ease the storm brewing in the hearts of his council. The Emperor's orders were swift. Intelligence officers were dispatched across the galaxy, their mission clear: uncover the truth behind humanity's impossible victory. They infiltrated human networks, scouring their transmissions for any hint of an explanation. Agents slipped into the shadows of Earth's colonies, listening, observing, searching for answers. But what they found was nothing. Humanity's news networks continued as if nothing had happened. Reports of mundane politics, economic shifts, and entertainment filled their broadcasts. There were no celebrations, no declarations of triumph. The humans didn't seem to know about the destruction of the Zenith Armada. Even their military, scattered across their colonies, remained in standard positions. No mobilizations, no signs of heightened alert. It was as if they were completely unaware of what had transpired. The intelligence officers brought their findings back to the Emperor, their faces pale with confusion. "They don't know," one of them said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They don't know what they've done." The council was stunned. How could humanity have erased 60,000 ships without even realizing it? Was it an accident? A weapon they didn't fully understand? Or something far more terrifying, something beyond even their own comprehension? And then, the second message arrived. It came without warning, transmitted directly to the Emperor's private chamber. The words appeared on the holographic display before him, stark and simple, yet carrying the weight of an unspoken threat. "One ship was enough. Do not make us send another." The Emperor stared at the message, his hands gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavy with an invisible pressure. The words were calm, almost polite, but they carried a finality that sent a chill down his spine. This was not a boast. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The council convened again, their fear now palpable. The warlords, once so eager for retaliation, were silent, their bravado stripped away by the weight of the message. The strategists, already shaken, looked as though they might collapse under the pressure. What do we do?" one of them asked, his voice barely audible. No one answered. For the first time in its long history, the Zenith Dominion, the great conquerors of the galaxy, found itself paralyzed by fear. They had always believed in their invincibility, their right to rule. But now, that belief was crumbling. The humans, so primitive, so insignificant in the grand scheme of the cosmos, had done the impossible. With a single ship, they had brought the Dominion to its knees. And with a single message, they had ensured that fear would spread like a shadow across the Empire. The council chamber, once filled with the confident voices of rulers, was now silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the holographic display, the words still lingering in the air like a specter. "One ship was enough. Do not make us send another." The Zenith Dominion, despite its fear, could not allow the humiliation to go unanswered. Their pride, forged through centuries of conquest and domination, demanded action. But this time, they were cautious. They sent a smaller fleet, 2,000 ships, a fraction of the first armada, to the coordinates provided by the humans. It was a calculated move, a test to probe the unknown threat without risking their full strength. The fleet departed in silence, the void swallowing their massive forms as they slipped into hyperspace. The crews aboard these ships were hand-picked veterans hardened by countless battles, their resolve unshakable. They carried with them the weight of their empire's expectations, but beneath their stoic exteriors, a shadow of unease lingered. They had all heard the stories of the First Fleet's obliteration. None of them spoke of it, but the fear was there, buried deep in their hearts. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found nothing. The coordinates led them to a stretch of empty space, a barren void devoid of stars, planets, or any sign of life. The ships formed a tight formation, their sleek, angular hulls glinting faintly in the dim light of distant stars. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of engines and the occasional murmur of voices over the communication channels. Scanners showed no anomalies, one officer reported, his voice tense. No planets. No stations. No, anything. Admiral Lither, the fleet's commander, stood on the bridge of his flagship, his sharp eyes scanning the emptiness before them. His jaw tightened. Something about this place felt wrong. The void seemed to press against the ships, as though the darkness itself was alive, watching, waiting. "Hold formation," he ordered, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. "Keep scanning. There has to be something here." But there was nothing. Minutes stretched into hours, the tension aboard the ships growing with each passing moment. The crews whispered among themselves, their voices hushed as though afraid to disturb the oppressive silence. And then, it began. The lights on the ships flickered, a faint, almost imperceptible pulse that rippled through the fleet. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger, more erratic. The hum of the engines wavered, and the air seemed to grow colder, carrying with it a sense of dread that seeped into every corner of the ships. "Admiral, we're detecting something," one officer stammered, his voice trembling. I don't know what it is. It's everywhere and nowhere at once." Before Lither could respond, the first ship vanished. It happened in an instant. One moment, the ship was there, a massive battleship bristling with weapons, and the next, it was gone. No explosion, no debris, just an empty void where it had been. The screams of its crew echoed across the communication channels, a chorus of terror that was abruptly cut off. "Shields up! All ships, defensive positions!" Lither barked, his voice sharp and commanding. But even as he spoke, another ship disappeared. And then another. Panic spread like wildfire. The crews scrambled to respond, their voices rising in desperation as they tried to make sense of the impossible. But it was futile. The fleet was unraveling, consumed by an unseen force that defied comprehension. The disappearances were relentless, each one accompanied by a chilling silence that seemed to echo in the void. The screams of the crews grew louder, more frantic, until they were silenced one by one. And then, the voice came. It wasn't transmitted over the communication channels. It didn't come from the speakers or the consoles. It echoed directly in their minds, a cold, emotionless whisper that seemed to come from the darkness itself. "You were warned." The words carried no malice, no anger, only an unyielding certainty that sent shivers down their spines. It was a voice that spoke of inevitability, of a power beyond their understanding. Lither gripped the edge of his console, his knuckles white as he stared into the void. He opened his mouth to issue an order, but no sound came out. The fear was too great, paralyzing him as the fleet continued to vanish around him. One by one, the ships disappeared, their lights flickering out like dying stars. The screams faded into silence, leaving only the oppressive stillness of the void. And then, there was nothing. The second fleet was gone, erased as completely as the first. The Zenith Dominion's pride, their refusal to heed the warning, had led them to ruin once more. When word of the fleet's fate reached the Dominion, it spread like a plague, infecting every corner of the Empire with fear. The High Council convened in silence, their once proud faces pale and drawn. The warlords, who had roared for retaliation, now sat in stunned silence. The strategists, who had begged for caution, could only shake their heads in despair. The message was clear. The humans or whatever force they commanded were not to be challenged. The Zenith Dominion, for all its power and arrogance, was left with nothing but fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the void. Fear of the quiet, unassuming species that had brought them to their knees with a single ship and a simple warning. "You were warned." The grand halls of the Zenith Palace, once a symbol of unshakable power, now felt suffocating and cold. Emperor Valen Cories, a ruler whose name had once inspired awe and fear across the galaxy, sat alone in his throne chamber. The golden light from the crystalline walls, once warm and triumphant, now seemed dimmed, as if the very stones shared in the Empire's shame. He stared at the message displayed before him, the words etched into his mind as if burned there. One ship was enough. Do not make us send another. The weight of those words crushed him. He had tried to hold on to the pride of his people, to maintain the facade of control. But now, after the Second Fleet's complete and utter annihilation, there was nothing left. No fleet. No plan. And no hope. For the first time in the long and storied history of the Zenith Dominion, a ruler was forced to make a decision that no emperor before him had dared to consider. He would surrender. The thought was a blade to his pride, cutting deeper than any physical wound ever could. But it was the only choice left. To resist further would mean the annihilation of his people, the erasure of everything the Dominion had built over countless centuries. Corys rose from his throne, his steps heavy as he approached the console that would transmit his message. The room seemed to grow colder with each step, the silence pressing in on him like a shroud. His hands trembled as he reached out, his fingers hovering over the controls. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath to steady himself. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of the commanding authority it once held. "We will not resist," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We surrender." The message was sent, carried on invisible waves through the vast expanse of space. And then, there was nothing to do but wait. The response came faster than anyone had anticipated. Across every Zenith system, from the glittering cities of the core worlds to the farthest outposts on the Empire's borders, every screen flickered to life. The image was simple, stark, and chilling in its simplicity. "Understood." The word lingered on every display, its meaning as clear as the void between the stars. There was no gloating, no demands for tribute or reparations. No fleets appeared in Zenith space to enforce the surrender. No armies descended upon their worlds to claim them as spoils of war. It was as though humanity or whatever force had spoken on their behalf no longer saw the Zenith Dominion as a threat. The silence that followed was deafening. In the days that followed, the Zenith people struggled to comprehend what had happened. They had prepared themselves for the worst: enslavement, annihilation, the complete subjugation of their empire. But none of it came. The humans had chosen mercy. Or perhaps, some whispered in the shadows, it wasn't mercy at all. Perhaps the humans simply didn't care. To them, the Zenith Dominion was no longer a rival, no longer worthy of their attention. They had swatted away the Empire's fleets like an insect, and now they had moved on, leaving the Zenith to wallow in their shame. The High Council convened in hushed tones, their once proud voices now filled with uncertainty. The warlords, who had once roared for conquest, were silent, their eyes downcast. Even the strategists, the architects of the Dominion's many victories, could offer no answers. What had humanity become? What power did they wield that could erase entire fleets without leaving a trace? And why had they chosen to spare the Zenith, when they so clearly held the power to destroy them? No one knew. Emperor Corys stood on the balcony of his palace, overlooking the capital city of Zenith Prime. The streets below were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of life subdued by the weight of recent events. The people moved like shadows, their faces pale and drawn. Corys' gaze drifted upward, to the stars that glittered in the night sky. Once, those stars had been symbols of the Dominion's ambition, the countless worlds they had claimed as their own. Now, they felt distant, unreachable, a reminder of how small and fragile they truly were. The Emperor's hands gripped the railing, his knuckles white. He had spent his entire life believing in the supremacy of his people, in their right to rule the galaxy. But now, that belief lay in ruins. The humans had shown them the truth. They were not the masters of the galaxy. They were not invincible. They were not even significant. And yet, they had been spared. Why? The question burned in Corys' mind, a torment he could not escape. Was it pity? A warning? Or something else entirely? As he stood there, the words of the message echoed in his mind, a final reminder of the power that had brought his empire to its knees. Understood. It was over. The Zenith Dominion, once the greatest power in the galaxy, had been humbled. And now, all they could do was live with the knowledge of their defeat, and the fear of what might come if they dared to challenge humanity again. For in the silence that followed their surrender, one truth became clear. The humans were not conquerors. They were something far more terrifying. The Zenith Dominion, once a vast empire that stretched across the stars, began to wither from within. Their fleets, once symbols of conquest and domination, now prowled nervously along their own borders. The ships, once brimming with confidence and purpose, now seemed like caged beasts, their movements hesitant, their commanders haunted by the memory of their unseen enemy. The Empire's people, who had once celebrated expansion and victory with songs and parades, now lived in muted fear. The streets of their great cities were quieter, their skies no longer filled with the triumphant roar of departing fleets. The Dominion's once unshakable ambition had died in the void where two fleets had disappeared without a trace. Whispers began to spread like wildfire, carried by frightened voices in shadowed halls. Some believed the humans had created a weapon so advanced, so horrifying, that it could erase entire fleets without leaving a single trace. Others spoke of something far older, something ancient and incomprehensible, lurking in the dark corners of the galaxy. The Zenith Dominion was no longer a predator. It had become prey hunted not by humanity, but by fear itself. Deep within the Dominion's archives, buried beneath layers of classified files and forgotten records, a young scientist named Lyrian uncovered something that chilled her to the core. She had been researching the fate of the Second Fleet, driven by a desperate need to understand what had happened. Her superiors had forbidden such inquiries, but curiosity and fear pushed her forward. At first, the files seemed incomplete, fragmented reports filled with static and corrupted data. But then, she found it, the last transmission from the Second Fleet. Her hands trembled as she played the recording. The room around her seemed to darken, the air growing heavy as the sound crackled to life. It wasn't a message from the humans. The voice that emerged was alien, unlike anything she had ever heard. It spoke in a chorus of echoes, as if countless voices were speaking as one. The language was incomprehensible, but the tone carried a weight that transcended words, a cold, unyielding authority that made her heart race. And then, as if sensing her presence, the voice shifted, the echoes coalescing into a single, chilling statement. The boundary was tested. The line was crossed. The consequence was delivered. The recording ended abruptly, leaving only silence. Lyrian sat frozen, her mind racing. This wasn't humanity. This wasn't a weapon. This was something else, something far beyond the understanding of the Zenith Dominion. She knew she had uncovered something forbidden, something that wasn't meant to be found. And deep down, she knew there would be consequences. The next day, Lyrian disappeared. Her colleagues found her quarters empty, her research erased, as if she had never existed. The Dominion's leadership denied any knowledge of her work, dismissing her as a rogue scientist who had acted without authorization. But the whispers continued. The truth, once uncovered, could not be silenced. The whispers spread through the Dominion like a virus, infecting the minds of soldiers, scientists, and civilians alike. The message was clear: humanity hadn't defeated the Zenith Dominion. Something else had. The revelations spread slowly at first, passed between trusted allies in hushed tones. But as more people pieced together the fragments of truth, the story began to take shape. This wasn't a war. This wasn't a conflict between empires. This was a warning. The force that had erased the Zenith fleets wasn't human. It was something older, something that had existed long before the Dominion had risen to power. Perhaps it had even existed before humanity itself. It watched from the void, unseen and unknowable, a silent protector of the galaxy's balance. Empires came and went, but it remained, ensuring that no one power grew too bold, too reckless. The Zenith Dominion had crossed a line they hadn't known existed, and they had paid the price. On the outer edges of the Dominion, in the dark reaches of space where no stars shone and no ships dared to venture, something stirred. The void seemed to ripple, as if alive, as if watching. The whispers spoke of it as a presence, a force that moved without form, without sound. Some called it a guardian. Others called it a destroyer. But no one knew its true nature. Humanity, knowingly or not, was under its protection. The Zenith Dominion had not been defeated by human hands. They had been spared by something far greater. The humans themselves seemed unaware of the truth. They continued their lives as they always had, oblivious to the power that had acted in their name. Perhaps they were lucky, or perhaps they had unknowingly aligned themselves with this force. For the Zenith Dominion, the message was clear: they had been warned. They had been shown mercy. But mercy was not guaranteed. In the darkest corners of space, where the stars themselves seemed to shy away, the presence stirred once more. The boundary had been tested. The line had been crossed. And next time, the consequence might not be mercy.